Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. We got a guest today. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. Oh, of course, we always have Dwain McFarland here as well, but joining us, the one, the only, Underdog Fantasy's finest. You know him. He's been here before. Hayden Winks at Hayden Winks on Twitter. Adds up. Hayden, hey man, how are you?
Doing good. Glad to be teaching the good folks the game of best ball, the greatest fantasy football game ever created.
Dwain, best ball, best fantasy format. Are we going there?
Hey man, I love best ball more every year. And when you have people like Hayden putting out great content, that are researching it, they have access to all the data. That's the cool thing about Underdog. They actually make a lot of this data, available to everyone. So the masses can look at it and try to figure stuff out. But yeah, I think it's just a game that continues to grow. I don't know if I'll put it number one yet, just for me specifically, but I will say this will be by far the most, best ball teams that I will have drafted. In a season. I think I'm already over 70, Ian. So I've already set a record, and we are only in July.
The one thing that best ball has is in May, you can talk about fantasy football now, like which we did not have at times a couple of seasons ago. And you can actually do it without sounding like a crazy person. You can be like, hey, I'm trying to win $2 million here. So I think that's what it gives the slight edge is for May and June, we can have an excuse to talk about this.
We're so much more in the weeds now, man. I go to like a bar and I'm like, oh, I could go talk to some strangers, or I could do another best ball draft on my phone. And then there I am for another 45 minutes, just lost in my own thoughts. But it's a great time. So, we're going to continue talking about it and worry about touching grass, talking to other humans at a later date. Again, people, find Hayden over at Underdog Fantasy. Him and Josh Norris always doing exceptional stuff. And, just shout out to Underdog for kind of just letting you what's the right word? Unlock the right strategy for all these tournaments, Hayden. You guys always have one different one up after another. Unfortunately, the puppy has closed, but still got Best Ball Mania and some slow drafts as well. But that is kind of your thing. So first thing I want to touch on, Hayden, is some of the work you've done throughout the summer. Looking at ADP, actually just saw a cool tweet from friend of the podcast, Scott Barrett, showing that really over the last 10 years, we've all gotten a lot better. Like just the correlation between ADP and like final finishes has gotten a lot sharper, particularly at quarterback. What is your general thumb on kind of reaching past ADP, and when are you willing to make an exception?
Yeah, so I think the thing about ADP is what's the point of drafting ahead of ADP if you can just draft that player a round or two later? So my study is in rounds 4 through 14 last year, 84% of picks in these middle rounds on Underdog Fantasy came either within 12 picks before or after the ADP. So if you're looking at a player that you really like and he's being drafted 140th overall, what's the point of drafting him at 98th overall if we can assume that for the most part he's going to be there when we have that selection at 136? So I did some studies. The teams that draft closest to ADP perform better than teams that do reach. And I think that staying around ADP is especially important in best ball because you're not just competing against the 11 people that you're drafting with, like your traditional home league. There's going to be somebody that's going to have these same exact players, but they're going to have them a little bit after ADP. And that's the one thing I keep trying to tell myself is for every single time I reach on a player by 12 picks, the next draft, somebody can draft that same exact player 12 picks after ADP. And you are eventually going to be competing with those teams. So you can do multiple drafts. I have my guys. I'm not like just draft off the highest ADP available. Have your guys, but make sure you're getting your guys at good cost.
Yeah. And Hayden, so one question I get on this one all the time, and I love this. So, and I think that is the big takeaway, it's just the fact that every time you're taking a player at, 12 spots ahead, someone else is probably getting them 12 spots after. Like that is the simplest, most beautiful way of putting this. And especially if you're going to draft multiple teams. But I get a lot of folks that reach out and they're like, I might only do 5 teams.
Yep.
Do you change your rule of thumb for that? Like if you're not going to be a mass entry player, how would you answer that? And then just one other question is, what about drafting from the turns? Because we know each time, like say if you're picking at 12, it's 22 picks, right? Before you go again. So pretty much like a lot of like, if we're just trying to look at 12 spots, like there's not a 12 spots unless you're targeting someone that you think, okay, normally, from my pick now, they go 12 picks past me where I'm picking now. So in that case, right, there'd be a good chance they're going to make it back. But if it's someone that you're thinking, is, 6 spots, 7 spots, 8 spots after your pick, do you widen that range, a little bit, whenever you're picking from the turns?
So I think if I'm only doing 1 to 5 drafts, like of course, we're trying to have fun. Get the players that you like. If you're trying to have the best odds of winning the whole thing, then I'm still going to go back to this answer where you should still be drafting around 80 people. I mean, come on. You don't have to draft a bad team that you're not even rooting for just because I'm telling you that you're going to be a little bit better chance of winning this whole thing. The turn discussions is very interesting because I think the later you get into the draft, the wider the range of where players are getting drafted. Like in the first couple rounds, you're not going to see somebody that goes in the 4th round in the 2nd round very often. We stay very tight in ADP, but in like round 16, you can start getting players going all over the place. So as the later you get into the draft, the wider those ranges get. And that's where I think like at the 14, 15 turn, if you want to reach on somebody a little bit, you're really not punting off that much equity. These are long shot bets in the first place. I will not only, but for the most part, I'm doing some of my reaching when I'm trying to build that stack, but I'm really not reaching that often just because you can draft the next time and get your guy in just the next draft. And that's okay too.
That's Hayden, myself, and John Daigle do our weekly streams over at 4for4.com on Thursday afternoons. And I want to say I was working with like a Chase and Higgins early on stack, and I wanted to take Burrow at like round 5 or 6, like earlier than I should have. And yeah, Hayden brought up a good point. Just like, look, like getting Chase and Higgins is not impossible. I'm absolutely going to be competing with people who are going to reach on Burrow early, waiting just a little bit. When we're playing against hundreds of thousands of other lineups, it is a good idea to get a little contrarian there. But one thing he said in that, Hayden, was like, you're helping yourself a little bit here. Let's talk about week 17 correlation, the topic that's,
I'll be honest, Ian, I can't believe that you were even willing to bring this up. I'm very proud of you.
Well, here's the thing, and I can't completely ignore it when smart people like Dwain, like Hayden himself, like John Daigle are talking about it, because as much as I like to think I have everything figured out, maybe this old dog can learn some new tricks as well. So Hayden, what's your overall stance on the most nerd virgin topic we've freaking had in this entire industry this summer, week 17 correlation?
Yeah, it's the worst, but at the same time, it is true. And the reason why it's so important for Best Ball Mania 3 in particular is $2 million to first place, $1 million to second place. That gets divvied out based off of how well you do in week 17. Of course, you have to get there, and we can debate all that stuff. But week 17, first place, that's how the big prizes get mapped out. So with that being said, it almost turns into like a little bit of a DFS slate if you guys are familiar with that. So that's where you're talking about a quarterback with 2 of his pass catchers you're trying to stack. But really the difference is, like, everyone knows that for best ball, we've been stacking for the last couple of seasons of best ball. This year, it's about the bring back correlation. How much does the opposing player match up? And I think that there is a little bit something to this. There's a reason why in DFS we'll pick a quarterback, 2 of his receivers, and then a receiver on the other team. Now, I don't think that we should just say they're playing each other, they have correlation. The positions themselves have different correlations. Like a wide receiver and the opposing wide receiver correlate better than the running back and the other running back, because if one running back goes for 25 points, that means they'd probably have a lead, and that means the other running back's probably not getting fed the ball. So I think that we have to get a little bit more detailed and basically be applying to the DFS principles to best ball. So I think that for the most part, I'm adding a little bit of correlation. I'm not going out of my way. I'm not reaching for it. If it's available for me and the positions actually map out, then it's a nice little cherry on top. I think that we're discussing it a lot because it's new. Yes, it does matter. I don't think it's the biggest priority. Getting the right players, roster construction to me is way more important than week 17 bring back correlation.
And Dwain, the one thing when I have listened to your thoughts on this, I think you've done a good job with, is we don't care about like defensive matchups more than like we're caring less than ever about defensive matchups. If you're going to target one of these matchups, just do the high scoring game with 2 great quarterbacks on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we've seen. I mean, typically, historically, like when you look at the 50 plus, point projected game totals, it's usually great quarterbacks playing each other. And that's what, to Hayden's point, if we're playing a DFS slate, where does all the money flock to, right? It flocks to like the 2 games where the great quarterbacks are playing, and then we're stacking all the different weapons. So I love this, just because it's thinking about that same, type of thing just further out. I mean, if you look at the AFC West and NFC West alone right now on Superbook, they account for 56% of the games projected for 50 points or more on the schedule. Yes, Superbook already has all the totals up for all the games. So that's just through week 17. So, and I think there are different ways to think about it, right? There's a lot of macro correlation if you build a lot of rosters, containing those types of players, right? Because you're going to get, well, the Broncos are going to play the Chiefs. The Broncos are going to play the Chargers. The Broncos, they're also going to get to play the Rams. They're going to get to play the 49ers. And those are teams that all are loaded with a lot of great talent. Now, not a lot of those players are available late in your underdog drafts. Like most of them are going to go like in the first 10 rounds. Some of them, you'll be able to get some players later. So you have to think about that as well. But yeah, I like thinking about like the micro correlation at the end of the season is nice. But this year, just the way the schedule works out with the AFC West and the NFC West, I love it.
Hayden, you talked about the bring back type of stacks, but I know you've done a lot of research looking at the past winners. Now, I know we're playing for 2022, but what did you see about general stacking principles in terms of, if we're rostering 3 quarterbacks, we want to have all them stacked with one teammate. Is it okay to go with 2 teammates, usually just wide receivers, not tight end? Do you have, a couple general rules of thumb you like to use for just same team roster stacking?
So when it comes to team stack, I think that we have to kind of break it down between in a 1-game sample versus the entire season. Like a running back's going to be positively correlated with his quarterback over the entire course of the season because you just want that team to do well. Now, that's where it gets tricky because I just said in week 17, we got to come in first place. So then you have to be looking at how are teammates correlated in a 1-game sample at ceiling outcomes too, because I don't care about what happens on the 50th percentile outcome. You're trying to come in first place out of over 400 people in this tournament.
First to last, baby.
Yeah, we got to be looking at ceiling outcomes. What happens when a running back does well, when he scores 30 points? What does his wide receivers and all that stuff do? I ran a bunch of numbers. I looked at it from best ball data. I looked at it with just not best ball data, but just how teams score in general. And it comes back to the same thing. The quarterbacks and wide receivers have the most correlation together. Then quarterbacks and tight ends have a little bit. The running backs and the wide receivers, not very much in the 1-game sample here. And the other thing is you don't get like the third wide receiver popping off at the same time as the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. For the most part, it's 2 wide receivers or I'll say 2 pass catchers. So most of my stacks is going to be 1 quarterback and 2 of his pass catchers. That can be 2 wide receivers. That can be 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end. But I'm very rarely building out these mega stacks. And I think I looked back at the Bengals week 17 last year, and they had another blowout game in week 15 too. And even those massive games, like we're talking about like passing yards records here, even those teams that had the 3 teammates did better than the teams with the 4. And that was at the greatest possible game that you can possibly have for fantasy. So for the most part, I'm trying to come up with as many mini stacks as possible, 2 or 3 players from the same team. You're rarely going to be seeing me draft 4, 5, 6 players from the same team because you want to be very particular about how this stack is going to work out in week 17. If you drafted Joe Mixon and T. Higgins and Joe Burrow and Tyler Boyd, it's hard to see how all of them are going to pop off in that week 17 game.
Hey, on the bringbacks real quick, Hayden, like, because one thing I will notice, I see it a ton. Like somebody starts off, let's say they grab Mike Evans, they come back and get Brady, they get Godwin or Gage, right? It's a pretty typical stack. You'll see it's pretty affordable, on Underdog. And then I'll see them miss on, like, obviously they didn't get DJ Moore the way they drafted. Maybe they missed Robbie Anderson. And so I'll just see that team like throw a dart. Well, I'll just take Deonta Foreman. It's, my week 17 matchup of the Bucks versus the Panthers. But like based on the research you've done, and then just, some of the, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I think it's Brandon Gadula, where you had brought up his column in one of the ones you wrote, and I actually went and read it. I was like, wow, this is really good. I'd seen some stuff from RotoViz in the past, but I thought he did a great job of laying it out. And really what your data is saying, like, look, if Deonta Foreman goes off in week 17 and McCaffrey's out, it's most likely you're not going to have all the Bucks players going off because you've got the RB1. Yeah.
Dwayne, I thought you mispronounced Brandon Zylstra's name. I thought we were still talking about
No. No, I was actually crediting an author. So if I said it wrong, Hayden, correct me because I want to make sure we get it right. He's from Number Fire. It was a great article.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's exactly right. You got to think about how these games play out. Like Deonta Foreman going off, first of all, against the Bucks, one of the best run defenses in the league, and playing with the game script, we're already getting sideways. In that example, I think that you go with Terrace Marshall in round 18.
Agree.
All of a sudden, the Bucks go off. Now they're just trailing. It's just throwing into the slot to Terrace Marshall, maybe he scores a touchdown. The other thing about this, like the correlation stuff though, that makes it interesting is you can build like correlation based off of contingencies. And like the classic example is like right now, Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne might not have the most correlation if Justin Jefferson's healthy, because how are all three of them going to eat in this offense? But if Justin Jefferson misses time, all of a sudden the rest of the offense gets projected for more volume. So that's where like best ball gets so complicated, because like some of these players like in a 1-game sample don't make sense to us right now. But if an injury breaks away, all of a sudden things change. So that's where you kind of have to be really mapping these things out. But in general, draft more teammates together. I'm less concerned about the bring back options. I want 3 players, 2 players from the same offense, and just keep doing that as many times throughout the draft.
Are there any exceptions to that, Hayden, where if we have a run heavy enough quarterback, we're willing to just go naked with them, no stacks at all? I mean, we do have Lamar, Trey Lance, Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields. Like, are we still going out of our way to stack them? Because I have had lineups where I get Fields, he's basically QB 16 or so. He's, if you really want to go like late round QB, he's kind of, in my opinion, the last one you can get. And now I'm spending, round 17, round 18 picks on Byron Pringle and Velus Jones. And I struggle to look at myself in the mirror after that. Am I wasting my time there, man? If we have one of these run heavy quarterbacks, do we just roster them and say, okay, that's good?
So I think the dual threat quarterback being naked is better than it with like a statue quarterback. But I still think if you have Trey Lance, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, you name them, you're still better off having one. I think the real debate is having 1 or 2 in those options. I think that someone like Lamar Jackson, you can go Rashad Bateman at the round 4 or 5 turn. Then you can sprinkle in Devin Duvernay if you want to later. I'm debating if you want Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and Rashad Bateman, because Lamar Jackson's such a dual threat. But I think that for the most part, if you have Trey Lance, you got to be drafted one of the 3. Like if Trey Lance is going to finish as the quarterback 1 on a week, like, is he really going to rush for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns? Like that just like doesn't happen. You're hoping for like 80 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 in the air, and it was a long one to Brandon Ayuk. Like that's how you get that ceiling outcome. So I think for the most part, even with the dual threat guys, give me one of his wide receivers. I've been doing a little George Kittle, Trey Lance. You can do Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and those examples. But even with Justin Fields, like if you missed out on Darnell Mooney, you're sitting at Justin Fields. I hate to say it, you got to grab Cole Kmet, who I don't even think is that good at football, or Byron Pringle later on. You just got to hope that one of them has like a longer touchdown here.
So small sample, but the strategy I've used when Lamar Jackson falls to me past ADP and I'm near the turn. So say I'm picking like 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. I'll just take Bateman first. And it's so funny because everybody will just let Lamar Jackson go by because they're like, I don't have anybody to stack him with. But if you take Jackson first, Bateman will like always go. And that's just super small sample. I've just been toying around with it. But it's interesting. When the quarterbacks slide, right, it's because the people that, own their top weapons are deciding to not take them. And then everybody else is like, well, what's the point? Because I can't stack them now. And so at some point, it just becomes a value because it's just Lamar Jackson and he's a badass, right? And you're getting him past ADP. So it's like you don't want to overthink it. Hey, I did have one other question on quarterbacks, like while we were on them.
Okay.
You also wrote something about like, and I love the contingency base, draft thing and layering in, the bringbacks and all that. Like the bringbacks is really kind of a new thing that we're talking about this year, but it's something I've thought about in redraft. I like your word for it, contingent based, drafting. Mine was just really more around roster construction, but there's tons of stuff Hayden has. You guys can go check it out. It's around like this if then, like it's really based on the way you start your draft and you start your team. Then you start thinking about, okay, the way you should think about your stacks and just your general roster construction. But one of the things that you did write about this year was quarterbacks. And when is it just too early to take a QB2? And so let's say, actually, I'll let you lay it out because you got some different examples based on, again, contingent, like the way you started your draft. How early did you take your first quarterback, et cetera?
Yeah. And the way I'm actually really doing that is thinking about how I'm drafting and assuming I'm right, because you can't be hedging against yourself. You got to get pretty lucky. Like obviously there's edges here, but you got to get pretty lucky with how your draft's going to fall through to win these big tournaments. So like when I am talking about the quarterback and the column was about when should I draft my quarterback to, I looked at the Kyler Murray season from 2020 when he was like a 6th, 7th round pick and he was an absolute baller. And then I looked at Josh Allen last year, he was like a round 4 or 5 pick and he was an absolute baller. And I looked at those teams specifically. If you drafted Josh Allen or Kyler Murray, you basically just hit the stone cold nuts for that season. And I looked, in the best pairings were when the quarterbacks were being drafted after round 8, round 9, round 10, all the way into like the round 13, 14 range, you're going to be betting on those quarterbacks when you have the best quarterback season. So for the most part, like if you have Josh Allen, even if Kyler Murray's sitting there in round 6, I would be passing on them. That's too much draft capital into one position. Now, if you have Josh Allen and all of a sudden Matthew Stafford or Aaron Rodgers has fallen around after ADP, that's, I think, the sweet spot. And then that scenario, you'd only be drafting 2 quarterbacks. Something I have noticed, though, is that the scoring for quarterbacks is way up the last like 2 years. And I think for the most part, there's reasons why that is. Like the NFL offenses are changing. The elite quarterbacks are really pushing with like neutral pass rates and all that stuff. So the environments are a little bit different. But I am wondering if like with the wide receivers changing teams, like Aaron Rodgers loses number 1 and he goes to like that tier 2 or tier 3 quarterback to Derek Carr. Same thing with Tua and Mahomes. I wonder if the strategy now is going to be draft Patrick Mahomes in round 4 and then wait all the way to like the Daniel Jones, the Mac Jones, like really push it. And that's when you go your second quarterback build. So in the end, just don't invest too much into the quarterback position. I think that having 2 by round 8 would be pushing it too much. I think that you can double dip like Trey Lance, Matthew Stafford. I think that's totally fine though.
I love that you brought up the Daniel Jones idea there because I've been getting a lot of that. I can't go on a best ball stream without bringing up my affinity for Carson Wentz at the end of these drafts and Jared Goff stacking with the Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, yeah, I know everyone, it's disgusting, but this is how we got to think about it. It's like Wentz or Goff in round 16 or 17 or like Tua in round 11. Like, yeah, I think straight up I have Tua ranked ahead of him as well. But Hayden, like, I think we like, to me, that's that QB kind of the low end QB2 to the QB3 tier. I think there's like 8 or 9 quarterbacks arguably in that, and the disparity in ADP. Like I'd much rather be taking shots at running back, wide receiver still throughout, rounds 11 through 15. And then, yeah, let's dip into the maybe a little bit more disgusting waters, but we're at least, in a more shallow part of the pond in this messed up metaphor I'm trying to give right now.
Yeah, I mean, like in round like 10, 11, I think there's some really high upside plays at running back based off of the contingencies. Your Rashad Whites, Isaiah Spillers, those types, Alexander Madison, where you're one ankle roll away from having a month stretch where you're talking about top 12 fantasy production at the position. Then you go back and you get a little bit deeper. Now we're talking into like running backs where we're not even sure if they're the RB2, like Ty Davis Price. And all, like you can make a case like, yes, they have some upside themselves, but more things have to break their way. And sitting right next to them is like Mac Jones, Daniel Jones, or 2 of my favorites. You like Carson Wentz. I can be sold on Jared Goff. Like to me, like at like round 15, like we know that there's going to be a starting quarterback there for the entire season. To me, that's where like I'm starting to get into like the late QB2 range. I'm starting to find myself getting Kyler Murray and then waiting for Daniel Jones, Mac Jones in particular there. The one thing is just like Trevor Lawrence, like I see the upside case and all of his pass catchers are so cheap. And I like to throw in my quarterback and tight end stack. And then to where you can get Evan Ingram, who Ian, you had like a cool tweet earlier in the offseason where he's like top 10 in fantasy points, like for like 3 straight years. And then in comes your boy, Jason Garrett, and all shit goes down. Yeah. So I think it's really just mapping out. And really when you're talking about those quarterbacks, did you draft Terry McLaurin? Like, cause if you didn't draft Terry McLaurin, then you shouldn't probably be drafting Carson Wentz. That's why I keep drafting Mac Jones, because I'm sitting there just hammering Hunter Henry and Devontae Parker because they go in like round 12, and then you can get Mac Jones after. So you really just have to map things out.
And Dwayne, I think we've talked about that too, where it's like, not that I think I probably keep getting Carson Wentz because I'm so damn high on Terry McLaurin. Like in that tier, I think it's like accepting that we're talking about a bunch of likely bad quarterbacks here. Let's do exactly what Hayden's talking about. Shoot for the stars, assume things go right, and just take the stack that's available.
Yep.
Yeah, but you could also you could have Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel, right? Yeah, you can. And you could get Wentz because they're all so cheap. And then you're kind of back to, well, what if something happens to Terry McLaurin, like what, Hayden was talking about earlier? Then maybe that does open the door for those 2 guys, to play better. But the one that you mentioned that has really been growing on me, and Ian and I talked about him last week a couple times, I think, is Jared Goff. Like just looking at it, I mean, we're taking Amon-Ra St. Brown the end of the 5th round, early 6th round right now on Underdog. You're going to take TJ Hawkinson in the 7th or 8th round. And then we've got Jamison Williams, who's getting pushed down a little bit, rightfully so, because we don't know how it's going to look to begin the season with the injured knee. But he's a guy that could come on late. Pretty much DJ Chark is drafted every draft. And not to mention, we've got a pass catching back that goes in round 2 and DeAndre Swift. So like when we just look at all those ADPs And then you look at Jared Goff and how far down the board he's sitting, like he immediately makes sense to me. Like he's probably going to do better, right, than what we're expecting. And if the Lions really do take a big step forward and you get lucky and you can stack Goff with 2 of those, options that we like in the first 10 rounds, then I think that's a solid path.
Yeah, we've seen Jared Goff be fantasy viable. Obviously, that was with Sean McVay, but this offensive line is really good. This is the second year in the system. I think that there's actually like legit talent here, and they all kind of mesh pretty well together. I think the name that I'm really starting to come around to is DJ Shark. That he gave him $10 million this year, and all the reports, and I think it's a smart thing for the Lions to do as just like an organization is let's play this thing really slow with Jameson Williams. I mean, he tore his ACL in the postseason of college football. 9 months from his recovery would be in like the middle of October. What's the point? We're not trying to win a Super Bowl this year. Jameson Williams was our guy. We traded up for him. Why rush this thing? I think that they're going to play it slow with Jameson Williams. I've been fading him at ADP, even though I thought he was fantastic as a prospect. And I think that DJ Shark's going to be like their true X receiver. That's what he does. That's something that the Lions have not had. He is a little bit of a better and best ball pick down the sideline. And I think that Jared Goff is completely free. And the reason why he's completely free is everyone doesn't like the guy. Like he's not the sexy name. Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Jared Goff, Adam Thielen. These guys are not going to be drafted at like their median outcomes because nobody wants to draft these guys. So that's a hint. If you haven't heard a fantasy analyst talk about the guy, he might be being overlooked a little bit.
Yeah, Carr's another great one.
Yeah, if you're not a top 12 quarterback, the whole world just seemingly thinks you suck these days. And it's like, we can always take the value. Hayden, we were on a stream earlier. I mentioned the 4-4 already, but we had last year's Best Ball Mania winner, Justin Herzig, on it. And we were talking a little bit about handcuff running backs. Now, under the idea that we need everything to go right, from that perspective, why handcuff Ezekiel Elliott with Tony Pollard? Because by doing that, you're implying that Zeke's going to suck and you're going to burn your 4th round pick. Justin brought up a good point. That was like, okay, what if you, and his was a little bit different where it was Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor. So you weren't quite burning a pick early on Hines the same way you would with Pollard. His point was you can be the contrarian team where a bunch of Jonathan Taylors make it through to the final couple weeks. And you're the one squad that also has Nyheim Hines, God forbid something happens. So do you have an official stance on the handcuffs? Because I do see where Justin's coming from. Obviously, he knows a hell of a lot more about winning best ball tournaments than I do. I do wonder, though, are we starting to just, how much extra value really is that in this contrarian? Are we giving up too much value by handcuffing, basically?
Well, just to peel back the curtain with Herzig in Best Ball Mania 1, where he won, he was the only team to have Alvin Kamara because something happened in week 16. And he was the only team that actually had Alvin Kamara, and he had the 5 touchdown game. And that's why he got so lucky, whatever you want. Maybe he was just really smart. But that tournament size was much smaller, and now it's a bigger tournament. I get this. Like, I fully understand this strategy. It's like, all right, if Jonathan Taylor smashes like he did last year, but just in week 16, he wasn't able to play, Nyheim Hines all of a sudden is in your lineup. He gives you 25 points, and then Jonathan Taylor's back. How many of those Jonathan Taylor teams are actually sitting there in the finals? I get that. There's a simulation where this exactly works. There's a lot of other strategy things that you can talk yourself into. So if you want to do it, I think it's fine. I would do it in the examples, not the Tony Pollard Zeke one. I think it's like the DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams one where the ADPs are so drastic. But I think for the most part, I'm not really messing with it. I can be sold. I don't really have a strong stance. I think I'm drafting more Jamal Williams when I don't have DeAndre Swift. And because you're kind of making a bet like, all right, if the DeAndre Swift team's done, that means they don't have a 2nd round pick. Jamal Williams might be my flex. Now I kind of have this super team. So for the most part, I'm drafting the handcuffs because I think they have more ceiling than the pass catching backs and half PPR best ball in particular. But for the most part, I'm drafting them when I don't have their RB1.
Yeah, I've done it like a couple of times, but it's only like when they slide past ADD. Like I did it with Madison once with Dalvin Cook, and everybody on Twitter blew me up. I'm like, I got him 24 picks past. Like, and what happens, right? If Cook goes down and he's the thing that makes everybody advance to the final round, and now you have Madison. Like there is a galaxy brain path, right, to it working out and you winning a bunch of money. But it really, at the end of the day, just came down to the fact that Madison was there like over 25 picks past, where I would normally take Madison or where the ADP is on Underdog.
It really does remain wild just how cheap Jamal Williams is. I have a handcuff index article finally coming out later this week, and I was just going through every team today, and in my opinion, the top 4 handcuff running backs combining great standalone value with that RB1 upside. AJ Dillon, Tony Pollard, Kareem Hunt, and Melvin Gordon, who just, I know Hayden, you've been beating that drum, but yeah, not enough credit giving to, hey, what if Javonte misses time? It's going to be the Melvin Gordon show. My next tier, which was good standalone value with RB1 to RB2 handcuff upside, James Cook, Ronald Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, Kenneth Walker, and Jamal Williams. Out of all those names I just said, Jamal Williams is going like 20, 30 running back spots later. Like, I don't get it. He's good at football. Is it just the DeAndre Swift love? Like, guys, like, is he ever going to keep falling? I keep waiting for it to happen, and it doesn't.
He's not going to keep falling. I think he's going to rise because smart people like you guys are talking about him more. He's not like the sexiest name, but you know what's happening in August? Hard Knocks. And Jamal Williams is the funniest dude on the planet. And when we get Hard Knocks going, we're going to start getting some puff pieces on Jamal Williams. So get your shares now before Hard Knocks starts. But I'm with you. He's paid well. I think he's the 12th highest paid player on the Lions. He's top 20 in running back spending as well. He was basically splitting goal line work with DeAndre Swift for a decent chunk of the season. And I think what's the reason why his ADP has fallen in particular is last year, DeAndre Swift missed some time late in the season and Jamal Williams was fine. He got some carries, but he wasn't a full 3-down player. Right. I will say that's probably the most likely outcome, but I think that this Lions team will be better. So even if he is like a 2-down goal line back, he still has a path to multiple touchdowns because the offensive line's better and the team's just going to be functioning at a high rate. And the other thing is he was on the COVID list. He was missing practice because of a thigh injury that had just happened there. So there's a little bit of context like getting played into this. So I'm with you. I think Jamal Williams is one of the most mispriced players in the entire player pool. I'm writing up my 10 must draft players and he's one of them.
Second most rostered RB right now. But it's what you said, Hayden. Like it's the injuries that people are discounting. But like at the end of the day, you're getting a player that's been an every down back. Like he's shown historically to be able to play all downs. Yep. We've got an offense that's ascending. And look, I know nobody wants to admit it, but there are cracks in DeAndre Swift's game. Like as much as we like him and he comes through with the explosive plays, like last year, if you looked early on, like whenever the Lions were in games and they weren't just getting blown out all the time, like it was a closer split between those two backs when they were both healthy. So I think Jamal Williams has a lot of outs. One, the Lions could just be better and his role could expand. Number two, DeAndre Swift has not scored well in PFF receiving or rushing grade either of the last 2 years, despite coming through with the big plays. So there's an opportunity that, look, the coaches could just be like, look, he needs more playing time. The other thing that could happen, obviously, is the contingency value. If something does happen to DeAndre Swift, and we know we've got a back with an every down skill set, like I think Jamal is an absolute smash, like where he's going right now. He is starting to rise. I missed him in Fishbowl. I could not believe it. I was like, how do I miss Jamal Williams and Scott Fishbowl?
Guess what round I got him in, Dwain?
I don't want to hear it. Don't talk to me. I'm muting if you're going to say anything.
16.
Wow. I'm in round 8 right now because Daigle's out in the freaking hiking in Banff and we can't get this draft cooking at all.
Okay, Dwayne actually already mentioned this in passing. I think we bring it up at least once in the episode now. Just the overall shootout potential of the AFC and NFC West with all these loaded quarterbacks there. And I was really happy when Dwayne went under the hood to do a similar correlation article. And his big takeaway was like, yeah, we can use week 17 as a tiebreaker here, but really focusing on the general season-long shootout potential sure makes a lot of sense to me. Do you have similar thoughts on that, Hayden, where, yeah, maybe a tiebreaker here and there for the week 17 stuff, but in general, man, let's just load up on these good offenses. It's Josh Norris, right, who always says that, just draft good football players and good offenses. Doesn't need to be hard, man.
Yeah, I'm with Dwayne on this one. There's clearly correlation. It's for multiple games of the season. If you get 3 of the teams, now we're talking about 6 total games. So obviously that's going to be the case. And maybe there's just something else to just how the standings are. They're pushing all each other and you're not going to have like the Jaguars where they're 8 games back and they're playing all of a sudden these scrub wide receivers. Yeah. Dwayne, I'm so with you. My first 5 picks in Scott Fishbowl: Justin Herbert, Derek Carr, Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, Mike Williams. Right there. Yeah, I'm going off the Dwayne principle here and just drafting all of the AFC West. I'll sprinkle in some other guys, maybe from the Broncos later on in my draft. But I think this is a sharp play. It's not just week 17. You also have to get there, and there's some added correlation here. I think that this could be a topic we start bringing up a little bit more. Maybe next off season, this is like the new wave.
And I haven't been able to go back, Hayden, and look at like the historical years of like what the books look like at this point in the year and how many games we had over 50 points, all that kind of stuff. But it struck me as like, I bet it's pretty rare to have 56% of the 50 plus games projected coming from just the AFC West and NFC West, from two divisions.
Yeah.
I bet we don't get that very often. I bet the stars don't align that way. I mean, you had to have Russell Wilson, right, come over to, the division. You've got Devontae Adams being added to the Raiders. There's a lot of moving parts going on that really created this situation. I mean, the only bad team that's a non-quality team that you have out of all of that is really Seattle, right? And they've got terrible quarterback play, but all the other 7 teams, like they're just going to be throwing haymakers all season.
Yep.
Fun little update we had before this podcast regarding J.K. Dobbins. Rap sheet comes out and says Dobbins, no sure thing for week 1, hasn't had any setbacks, but the injury was a serious one. I appreciate Rap sheet, but this was kind of one of his token, not going to go on a limb and say anything too far there, but he is acknowledging that, yes, this is a severe injury, and I think all of us have been aware of that now for a pretty good amount of time and fully understand that the pup list is a possibility. But J.K. Dobbins got on Twitter, immediately quote tweeted Rap sheet, said he's tired of being quiet. Come to me for your source because I might not even go on pup because that's how good my rehab is going. And I'm damn sure going to be ready for week 1. Also cited some good stuff he's been doing in the offseason with Jesus Christ himself. So J.K. Dobbins, maybe coming back. But Hayden, all of this immediate news aside, is there an injury situation or two? Maybe it is this one that you just really think could be massive. We talked before about Jameson Williams. There's Michael Gallup hanging out there, Michael Thomas. Like, to me, I'd probably say Michael Thomas is the one that we could be looking at like a legit 15, 20, like wide receiver position jump if we just find out he's fully healthy. But yeah, what's an injury situation or two that you're really keeping an eye on right now? Because once we know what's going on, it could be massive.
Yeah, I was doing prep last night for the podcast, and I had this Dobbins one as number 1, and number 2 was Michael Thomas. How I'm playing it, though, is I'm not fully trusting Gus Edwards' rehab either. Like, he tore his ACL as well. I'm not going to do the Mike Davis thing. Fool me once. Tyler Beatty's interesting, but I mean, we're talking about like a day 3 rookie. I thought he was kind of slept on as a prospect, but I mean, come on, this is a lot to go through. The way to play it is Lamar Jackson, Rashad Bateman. Like, what if last year's pass rates stay the same because the running backs just aren't fully there? And I think the difference here is just, it was very interesting. Like, now that we do this best ball thing year round, we basically forgot about the types of injuries that these players happen. And we're just all assuming that they're all 9 months. But like, I mean, we forgot like exactly when players were getting injured and what type of injuries. And then with the Dobbins one, it's multiple ligaments. And like, that's where I think I'm drawing the line. I'm learning that that's way more severe than just a isolated ACL. And that's why I think that the Dobbins stuff I'm taking pretty serious. I know that Rap Sheet got dunked on, but then he doubled down on the McAfee show. He said, like, I believe my source. So I'm starting to believe it's like all the Twitter doctors, they think that it's bad, and I'm starting to believe it.
Yeah, man. The Gus Edwards thing, because I've been drafting a lot of him, but we're not exactly getting great news about him either. He is a little bit older than Dobbins. It's the things that Dr. Evan Porter says he looks to the most in terms of recovery from a serious injury like an ACL, age, draft capital, because a lot of times that can help show just the freakiest athletes in the world, and those guys better at recovering. And then to your point, Hayden, not having that complex multi-ligament injury. So yeah, I could just see him bringing back Devontae Freeman, man. He was actually all right for them last year. He's still a free agent. He was like the least washed veteran they brought into that point. But yeah, I'm not so sure. To your point, I think the answer is probably just loading up on that passing game. Is there a wide receiver too we can get behind? Is it Duvernay? Like, why can't Devin Duvernay be all right?
I thought Devin Duvernay was like a reasonable prospect coming out. I mean, he had 1,300 yards at University of Texas, and he runs a 4.36 or whatever it was. Like, to me, that was like, okay, like that's at least interesting enough. He was supposed to be a slot only player, but they used him in 2 wide receiver sets last year. He's basically competing against James Prochet, who I think is like more of like an actual slot only player. So I think it is Devin Duvernay. It could be Will Fuller, something like that. But I think I've been drafting Devin Duvernay with my Lamar Jackson stacks for sure.
Dwain, where would you rank Julio Jones if he signs with the Baltimore Ravens?
I would get him into my wide receiver 4 conversation.
Ooh.
I mean, wide receiver 4. I mean, it's like, I'm not going to get like overly excited, but like to Hayden's point, like there's a scenario that plays out this year where the Ravens continue, to be more pass heavy than what we're used to seeing, right? Still be like a 60% drop back rate like last season. But in that case, that would help, from a standpoint for Lamar Jackson. But I would rather just draft Duvernay in the last round than have to deal with Julio Jones. What about, what are your thoughts, Hayden, on Gallup and Jalen Tolbert?
Yeah, it seems like Jalen Tolbert's got a leg up on James Washington. My fun fact about James Washington is he's making less money than the person that's going to win Best Ball Mania 3 this year. And I have a rule that if an NFL veteran is going to be making less than the BBM 3 winner, then he's on the do not draft list. Rojo is also on that list, and I'm very nervous about that one, but I have not been drafting Ronald Jones because of that. So I'm going to be betting on Jalen Tolbert. It sounds like Michael Gallup. There's no reason to rush him back. Same thing with like Chris Godwin, Jameson Williams, like players that they either were just drafted high or just got a lot of money. Like, what's the point of really rushing these players back in September? It's a long season now. So I'm drafting a little bit of Jalen Tolbert. I'm waiting for Michael Gallup's ADP to continue to drop.
The Cowboys, like, okay, the Browns have the most effective cap space because of their little hijinks they're doing with the first year of Watson's contract. Why are the Cowboys the number 2 team in cap space right now? Like,
Julio.
Yeah, I'm about to say, put your like Brian Windhorst like meme up there. Like, come on. This offense needs another wide receiver. I'm not sure if it's going to be Julio, Fuller, trade for Robbie Anderson. Like, if there's an I mean, we talk about the Colts maybe bringing back T.Y. Hilton. That's a possibility. We talk about the Packers. Like, to me, the Cowboys are the squad that, like, they even lost like Malik Turner last year, who went to San Francisco this offseason. Like, they have no depth at wide receiver.
Yeah, they can use another wide receiver for sure. The other injury note I had written down, this is the one that's going to get me canceled, is Ezekiel Elliott was playing on a partially torn PCL last year, and he was still getting all of the volume. Yeah, he was not nearly as efficient, but if you look at his splits before and after that injury, he was actually pretty effective. And the big plays were there. The broken tackles, all that stuff was there. What if Zeke is just like a little bit healthier this year? Like, I hate to be like the shooting down all of the Tony Pollard love, and nobody likes Zeke, but he's going at the round 4 or 5 turn. I mean, we're talking like you can get some 5th round shares for Zeke Elliott, and we're talking about the lack of weapons on the Cowboys offense. All of a sudden, it's a very thinned out depth chart. What if they just like give the ball to Zeke a little bit more, and he's not playing on a partially torn PCL?
I'm with you, Dwayne. Not so much, but Dwayne, I think you've been open to round 4 or 5, Zeke. Like, that's about the point where we're good.
Yeah, it's all priced in at that ADP.
Yeah.
Like, you're buying into an offense that we think should be good. Like, the Cowboys could definitely regress, but we know they run enough plays, and we know that they could just get the backs more involved in the passing game, right? That could be the answer, is that they're just going to get the backs more involved. And Zeke, he's not the same receiving threat that Pollard is, but Zeke's fine. Like, he can catch checkdowns out of the backfield, and then a half PPR. Fine. Those things add up. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised. Like, it's still like it's getting down to that turn now. I kind of thought like once like we started to get closer to the season, like Zeke would probably creep, up to like the beginning of the 4th, like the end of the 3rd. And that just hasn't happened yet. So it's kind of an interesting way that ADP is working itself out for Zeke. But yeah, like Pollard, and then Pollard, you got to take in round 7. So it's like, they're really tight.
I will say with Pollard, the reason why I'm high on A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones is because you look at the Packers offense, and I think it makes sense that those are their 2 top playmakers. You could see them running a lot of that offense through them. And if Jones gets injured, Dillon's going to be a top 5-6 running back. If Dillon gets injured, same thing for Aaron Jones. Like, that could be the same case for Pollard as well. If you look at the Cowboys offense, yeah, they have CeeDee Lamb. There's no one like that in Green Bay, but it's CeeDee, it's Zeke. Like, Pollard could just be Kellen Moore's number 3 option. Like, I was begging a couple years ago before the Cowboys drafted CeeDee, because before they didn't have like a slot receiver at that point after they had lost Cole Beasley. And I was like, oh my God, could Tony Pollard get this RB2 and slot role? Like, here we are, guys. It's July 18th. That's possible. Like, we could actually see Pollard kind of start this year. And my God, the ceiling's the freaking moon. God forbid something happened to Zeke, as we always go over, and nothing does, but you could imagine.
What if Pollard misses times? Where are we ranking Zeke? Like, we always do it the other way around because it's more exciting for everybody. But
this is the Melvin Gordon.
It's the same bet. We're talking about these like washed up players: James Conner, Leonard Fournette, Melvin Gordon. Like, all these, if you have the ability to be a 3-down back, which Zeke clearly has shown that, even if we think that he's washed, like the yards per carry stuff doesn't really matter for fantasy football. Are you getting the goal line carries, and can you be a 2-minute option guy? And I think that Zeke still has that. And we're talking about good offenses here. James Conner, Leonard Fournette, Melvin Gordon, Zeke Elliott, they all play for good offense. So I think that these are the type of bets I want to be making as everybody runs from the hills because they don't think that he's quite as fast as he once was.
I was going to label the show something about like best ball strategy, but now I think I'm just going to make it like Hayden Winks hypes up Ezekiel Elliott. And just
I can't live with this one.
Hayden,
no, don't worry. That's what our social team will do anyway.
Oh, okay. I'm terrified.
Fantastic stuff. You already gave out one of your all-encompassing tips, which is not to draft anyone that's making under $2 million that the first place prize winner of Best Ball Mania can receive. But if you were talking to someone who has never done a single best ball draft, and you could just give them 3 general tips, what would they be?
So the first thing is don't reach. You can kind of map out, like find the 10 players that you want to draft, figure out which round you need to be drafting them in, and then just target them in that round. Do not reach on your guys. They will, I promise you, they will be drafted around the ADP. So sit in that spot. And basically think about when you're drafting one position early on, just draft fewer of them. And I see this a lot where players were drafting way too many wide receivers. They'll do a 0 RB team. They'll have 6 stud receivers, and then they're still drafting like 9 wide receivers. That's too much. If you've drafted 4 or 5 good wide receivers, stop at 7. And the same thing on the flip side. If you drafted 3 running backs in the first 7 rounds, stop at 5 running backs in total. And then going back to the stacking, if you've drafted a quarterback, draft at least one of his pass catchers. For the most part, you should be drafting 2 of his pass catchers. That could be a wide receiver and a tight end. But for the most part, draft as many team stacks as you can, and then talk about the contingencies with the player archetypes and stuff. And that's why we walk through all the player stuff, is how these players map into your lineup. It's going to be based upon what your draft looks like in like the first 10 rounds.
Don't reach, draft fewer of the position if you get more early on, and draft at least one pass catcher from the quarterback you take. And maybe you can go take home that $2 million first place prize. Go make more money than Ronald Jones or James Washington in the year 2022. Dwain, do you have anything else for our lovely guest, Mr. Hayden Winks?
No, man. I'm gonna have to add another column, to the spreadsheet though. That's just got the under $2 million salary, which is under the $2 million.
I have a column for it. I wrote it. I did. I went on over the cap. You can find it on Underdog Network. I'll save you the time.
That is awesome. But no, man, just appreciate having you on.
Thanks, man.
You can find Hayden on Twitter at Hayden Winks. Again, always doing great stuff over at Underdog Fantasy alongside Josh Norris. You guys' the YouTube game is very strong, Hayden. Do you guys have anything else you're cooking up here as we're starting to get into, like, again, we do fantasy 365 days a year, but the casuals of the world, and I love you casuals. I'm not hating on you. You guys have a real life. Like, that is awesome. Sometimes I am even jealous of you, but Hayden, what do you have coming up here as we get into the thick of the fantasy football offseason?
Every Monday night, we're doing a best ball draft. I think we're going to do a versus thing. We're going to take old co-hosts that are no longer podcasting together and bringing them on to do a draft. That's going to be our theme for Monday nights. And then every Tuesday and Thursday, Josh and I have a regular podcast. We're taking tons of clips. We're trying to have like one player clip for like the top 100 players in Underdog. So all that stuff's going to be on the YouTube. And we have a podcast as well.
Fantastic stuff. Dwain, what do you got on PFF.com this week? Okay, you could unmute your mic, or if you're just that ashamed about it.
Yeah, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed about it. I thought I was done. No, we'll drop the top 150 last week. Quarterback strategy article came out last week. So this week we have running back, wide receiver. Next week we'll have tight end. And then, of course, we'll be getting into what's the one thing we need to be following from every training camp, that's going to matter the most for fantasy football.
Cannot wait for that one. Want to again invite everyone, if you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy PFF in general, or just football, or if you're just looking for something to spend money on, why not a PFF subscription? Promo code PFF40 gets you 40% off all annual PFF subscriptions, rankings, locked articles, betting guide, everything that you could want and more. Again, this is our best sale of the summer, of the year. Promo code PFF40 to save 40% off all annual PFF subscriptions. For Hayden, for Dwain, I'm Ian. Thanks to those for tuning in to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And until next time, take care, everybody.